Well, welcome to the KSS podcast, episode numero uno. Big thank you to the Moondogs production group. They're the reason we're able to do this. And this is kind of connected to Kinetic Spine and Sport, which is the chiropractic clinic that I run and that we're a part of. So, the whole goal of this podcast is to talk through different experiences and clinical situations that we get to go through ideas, different conversations, and things that are really helpful that happen inside rooms that we can't always just share in a different place. So the goal for this podcast is to have a place for those conversations, be able to talk with other clinicians, share some stories and some insight, and hopefully people can learn something through our experiences that makes theirs a little bit better. So that's kind of our big purpose here. So I'll introduce myself. My name's Dr. Luke, Dr. Luke Weber. I'm the owner of Kinetic Spine and Sport, which is on the other side of this wall here, which makes this very convenient. I'm in my 8th year of clinical practice. I have a background in high school, college sports. I grew up in the Mankato area and moved back about 4 years ago for a clinic opportunity, which is what we got going on now. So it's been fun to be back in the community, be a part of it as a professional and not a kid. It's cool to see these different opportunities that Mankato has, like randomly putting together a podcast, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time. So my guest with me today for episode number 1 is Allison Fleming. She's a chiropractic student that we've had the joys of working with through the last 3.5 months, and this is actually her last week of internship, so we had to quick throw this together so that she could be a part of this process, because a lot of this stems from the conversations that you and I have both had. So let you kind of intro yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Allison Fleming. I'm in my last term of school at Palmer College of Chiropractic, same school that Dr. Luke went to. I am a Canadian and did my undergraduate studies at the University of Alberta. I did a Bachelor of Kinesiology. And so for the past 3 years, I've been in Iowa studying and have had the opportunity to work with Dr. Luke for my last term of school before I graduate next month.
Fun little transition there. And it's kind of cool. We got connected through Dr. Casey Buns, who was the previous owner of Kinetic Spine and Sport before our transition occurred. And Dr. Casey's actually Allison's faculty supervisor back at Palmer. And she reached out to me and apparently had a funny conversation with Dr. Casey, so I guess you can kind of just share.
Yeah, when I was trying to decide who I wanted to precept with, Palmer gives you a long, extensive list of people, and so when I was just searching up, kind of searching through what I want and keywords of the type of practice I wanted to be in, I came across Kinetic Spine and Sport, and I knew that Dr. Buns had lived in Minnesota, and I knew I wanted to be in Minnesota, so I was kind of asking him what he thought about Kinetic Spine and Sport, and turns out that that he was the fast owner of it. So it was just a no-brainer then. I came up and spent some time with Dr. Luke in December of 2023 and came up again early in 2024, and then decided to precept with him, and I've been with him for the past few months.
Yeah, it goes super fast. And that's a cool example, I think, for us in private practice if we have connections to people back on campus. Because a lot of clinics want to work with students and are looking for students, whether it's for internships or hiring in the future, stuff like that. And so having a resource on campus like Dr. Casey, and fortunately I have a couple of other colleagues that I know, tends to help making those connections like way easier, way more efficient, and you kind of help people find a good spot for them, which I think is really cool. And that's kind of the point of this whole episode, is just sharing both of our experiences within this internship and sharing what worked well for us, what we would maybe do a little bit differently, and then some advice that we would either give to students or other clinics that are thinking about having a student intern. Because not all internships are the same. And like some are good, some are also not good. And so that's kind of our big topic of conversation today. So
let's dive into it.
Yeah, let's do it. So first we're just going to start with like what makes an internship a good internship, and we're trying to look at it from multiple perspectives. And so when we first started talking about this, Allie brought up the question of like, well, what makes me a good student intern, which I thought was a great question. And for me, the first part of that always goes back to it's so much easier to work with someone that's naturally curious and like they always want to learn. We've talked about what's on the other side of that conversation is like, what if you have a student that thinks they know everything? And I think we can all say that probably wouldn't go super well for a multitude of reasons. But I think one of the things that made this scenario really good for us is you came in ready to learn and wanting to learn.
Oh, for sure.
And even though like learning is not a smooth road all the time, like we were able to kind of learn through this learning process and manage things really, really well. And I thought that's what kind of gave us a first step for that. I guess what are your thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's so important for students to, again, recognize, it's funny because we're in our last term of school, we're eager to get out into practice. I've spent the past year at student clinics at Palmer being an intern, seeing, several students, many students throughout the past year. And, you get into your last term of school and you think like, hey, I know everything. Just like you walk into someone's private practice and are just like, give me all the patients. And it's interesting because there's so much that you don't know as a student and you don't know what you don't know. And it's a way different world treating students than it is being in private practice and dealing with like the public and with real life patients, if you will, because lots of times, students don't have many complaints or, they're just coming for their free care essentially because it's easy and convenient. And, it's a whole different ballgame being in private practice. So I totally agree that I think if you come in with an attitude of one that's willing to learn and feels like you have a lot to learn, I think that interning with like Dr. Luke specifically is amazing because he is here for all the questions. He loves the collaborative environment and talking through all things and has really like created a very safe space to just like ask questions and be unsure about things. And it's like a very supportive environment for sure. So you had said that you looked for someone that was kind of curious and open to learning. Are there any other things that you look for, I guess, in an intern?
Sure. One of the other conversations that we talked about a number of times is like, what kind of energy or personality does somebody kind of bring to the table? And I think with that, it's, in order to learn, in order to grow and like go through that process, like doing it in an active way, probably for most people is the best way to do it. And so figuring out like, hey, is this somebody that I can kind of jive with? Like, your 10th try internship, at least through Palmer, like it's a full-time job. Like
for sure.
You're here 20 to 30-ish hours a week or more. And so being able to be strategic about that. And, one of the conversations that we had around that was making sure that the way that you show up for your first patient of the day is the same or at least similar to the person that you show up for as your last patient of the day. And so being around people that match that energy, also match with the team really well. And some of that also just comes down to just being respectful, right? Being a good person and someone that's fun to be around. But I think the more that I get into small business, that ownership world, the more that you realize like how important your environment is. And you want to protect it. You want to set good rules and boundaries around it, which then allows you to bring in other people, allows you to bring in creative people that are, able to kind of liven up the clinic experience because like they're new, they're excited, they're learning.
I think that's something that I really noticed about your clinic when I came to Shadow. So one piece of advice I'd have to students is to, if you're thinking of precepting somewhere, like go shadow at least once or twice to kind of get an idea of the clinic. And that's something that I always felt about your clinic that kind of set you apart from other people was the energy that you brought to the clinic and how much you care about your people and your employees, how respectful you are, how open you are to collaborating. And I think that that creates such a good learning environment where students will feel so supported. And I know we'll get into this later, but kind of talking about some of the challenges, I guess, with our experience or just precepting and interning in general. But I think even when there has been difficult conversations, once again, you just handle it so well and like in a way that you're like as a student, you feel so supportive or supported and like it's an opportunity for growth and learning. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. When you were talking about the energy that you kind of bring, it's the energy that you bring to the clinic, the energy you bring to patient appointments, the energy, obviously we spend a lot of time together, sometimes upwards of 40 hours a week.
Yep.
And so, I'm following him around everywhere. And so I think, we've had really important conversations surrounding that and just being a positive person, also knowing how to, and learning really how to match patients' energies, where they're coming from, having an awareness of like the clinic flow and how ultimately there are challenges taking on a preceptor. You're adding another person into the clinic that you're not used to having. And so just being mindful of that and still like giving you space to do the business owner stuff that you have to do. And so kind of that leads me to another point of be in charge of your own like internship, in the sense of if there is downtime or if like Dr. Luke's busy, whatever the case might be, like there's something to learn, whether it's doing research, listening to a podcast, going up front and learning billing with the office manager. There's so many ways to make your internship a good experience for you and you're like in charge ultimately of your internship and also your life.
Yeah, and I think part of that understanding that when you go and do an internship, you probably have like a list of here's the 10 things that I want to learn. And it's great to prioritize some things because maybe your big thing at this point is like, hey, I need to get better at adjusting, or I need to get better at manual therapy, or I need to get better at, whatever it may be. Understand that it's good for you to have that list. At the same time, it's probably also good to trust your preceptor if they're also thinking like, hey, it might also be good for you to do, X, Y, and Z, even if it's not on your list. Because, again, it goes back to you don't know what you don't know. But a lot of us precepting clinicians, when we look at internships, one of the first things that pops up in my head was like, what didn't I get out of mine? Like, what did I miss in my internship? And fortunately for me, like I had an awesome preceptorship. Shout out to Dr. Mike Olson at Big Fork Valley Hospital, close to Canada. But it's like even in really good scenarios, you can still miss stuff. So really take the feedback and direction from whoever your supervisor is, knowing that hopefully they want what's best for you too. Like most people probably don't want to go sit up front and go through the billing process. We go through it a little bit in school, but not a ton.
No.
But at the end of the day, like if you get out into practice and you're treating people and you're taking care of people, you should be compensated for that somehow. And like the billing process is what connects your work to you being compensated. So being open to different things like that, or I think another good example of that is, there's a couple weekly business meetings that I go to, and that's, part of our marketing and branding. It's also a part of our community outreach. And, sometimes I think it's hard for students to think, well, I'm not going to live here, so why do I need to go out and go meet other locals? But it might give you a sense of, okay, here's how you can be in different professional settings, connect with other professionals, understand what industries might be really valuable, because there's, again, little hidden nuggets throughout that process. Because what did you think about the weekly business meeting stuff that we would go to?
Yeah, I loved it. And I didn't know previously that you were involved in those things. And so I didn't know that would then soon turn into part of my internship. But I absolutely loved it. And I think it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about, you think you're in 10th try, your last term of school, you think you're ready to go and know all the things and just are ready to go into practice. But there's so much that you get out of being in private practice in that last internship, and there's so many things that you don't know that you might think that you don't even consider. Mm-hmm. So like what Dr. Luke was saying, it's great to have that list of this is what I want to get out of the internship, and it's great to communicate that to your preceptor and see if that's something that they're able to deliver for you. But I would 100% trust your preceptor, because yes, maybe I'm not staying in the Mankato area, but that I've spoken a couple times at the business meetings. So learning to speak with others, learning just how to network. Those are valuable skills, and you never know where you'll find yourself in the future. So I would always keep that in mind when you're in your internship and just how you conduct yourself, because you might think you have, one trajectory for life, and then you never know what could happen, right?
Yeah, right. Life might have a different plan.
Yeah, exactly.
I think kind of piggybacking on that too, we talk about the topic of trust all the time. And whether it's trust between the clinician and the patient, trust between the clinician and the intern, trust between staff, and really understanding how each people build trust might be a little different, but those are the things that you kind of have to invest in as you go. And I guess I kind of bring that up because I've also had friends back in the day that didn't have good internships. And part of that, might have been they missed having the right conversation with them, or their expectation and the preceptor's expectations were different. So I think to really help people get to a good place to start is don't be afraid to have a good, difficult conversation with someone that you're thinking about interning with. You might not want the first hard conversation to happen in the middle of it and realize, oh my gosh, this is not a good place for me to have a good conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think fortunately for us, you and I kind of had to address a harder conversation before we started. Mm-hmm. And do you want to kind of speak to that, or
no, go on, continue.
Sure, yeah. So when Allie and I first met, a part of our conversation was, did she want to stay in Minnesota or Mankato professionally moving forward? Because we're in the process of looking for other chiropractors to hire. And so for her as a student coming with good praise from the faculty and just being able to hang out with her for a couple days in the clinic, seemed like a good fit. It's we talked our way through that conversation of what would it look like for her to work at Kinetic, and what would those details be. And I think initially, both of us were pretty excited about the potential for that. And, a couple weeks or months later, I can't remember the exact time frame, but Allie reached back out and just said, hey, we kind of have to have a conversation, and I just want us to be on the same page, which I think being on the same page could also be a theme of an internship. But she reached out and said, hey, I got connected to another clinic up in the cities. It looks like another really good opportunity, and I think I'm going to move forward with that contract as my first professional step. And that can can be a tricky situation for people, right? If a business is planning for you to stay, they're trying to go through the first couple steps that it takes to make sure that that's going to work on their end, and then for that to change. But the way that I looked at it was, at the end of the day, like, your internship is just to prepare you for what's next, whether that's with us or not. But again, a lot of it came down to us talking about that and making sure, like, no hard feelings, no resentment, right? But because we had to have that very unique, hard conversation before the internship started, that made me feel even more confident of, like, well, we're going to have hard conversations through this process anyways. And, like, we've already talked about one that's kind of, like, weird and awkward, but not.
Yeah, and I think that really comes down to, like, finding a preceptor, finding an intern that you can have those conversations with, because through that difficult conversation, I felt so supported then and knew that, like, we would be able to have conversations about anything. And it's interesting because we had another difficult conversation kind of midway through our preceptor, I would say.
Probably halftime.
Yeah, probably halfway through. And I was kind of, like, having a hard week, just feeling like I was on the sidelines a lot, not being as, like, actively participating in the care. And I was real nervous to have the conversation. Of course, it's difficult. No one likes it. And I cannot express how impressed I was by how I came into the conversation feeling distraught and left the conversation feeling like, I'm so excited to just come to work tomorrow. Like, I can't wait. Let's do this. And just how good Dr. Luke was about communicating, and, like, how he was able to express, like, this is a learning experience for me too. And, you know, we're going to have hiccups and we're going to work through it. And I hear what you're saying, Allie, and we're going to overcome this and be better than ever. And I feel like you can trust whether you're in his care, under his care as a patient or as an intern, that he has your best interest at mind, and that he's open to pivoting. And if something's not working well, like, he will figure it out and do better for sure. And you can be so confident about that. But yeah, I think that had that initial conversation gone poorly, I think that it gives, like, a really big telltale of, like, okay, well, how are they going to react because it's a common thing in your internship, and you hear this all the time, that about halfway through internships, normally, if a doc is looking to hire, that's when they would kind of present with the contract. And time again, if students, let's say, decline, docs don't tend to take it the best in lots of situations, and can kind of then remove the intern from actively treating patients and stuff. And so seeing just how, like, Dr. Luke handled himself about that, yeah, I mean, he was great. It was great. Like, yeah, truly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And part of that also comes down to, like, the student being comfortable enough to, like, express when things aren't going well, right? Because not all of us show up every single day with, like, rainbows and sunshine. Like, that's the reality of life, right? And so it's being comfortable and confident enough to be vulnerable back and forth, and you kind of have this dynamic with patients from time to time too, but being able to say, like, hey, here's where I'm at, or, like, hey, this is how this last week has been, this is how I feel about it, this is what I am seeing, you know, and I just want you to know that that's where I'm at, because, like, we talk to our patients every day, like, we always tell them, we don't feel what you feel, so, like, we need your part of that conversation to make sure that, like, we're doing the things that we're intending on doing.
And I want to add on to that too. The week that I felt like I was, like, on the sidelines, you had an extremely busy week, and one of your busier weeks that you've had in a while. And so it came down to, I mean, because I had so much time on my hands because of my personality and my nature, like, I started thinking, you know, the mind started going crazy of, like, what did I do wrong and what's happening, right? And then through having that conversation, you were like, hey, this week was super busy and I was trying to handle it myself. and I just like could not get behind patient appointments. Like it can't happen. And so I was so focused on just like treating the patients and stuff that, I didn't know how to best handle things. And so, yeah, I guess like that honesty on both ends. And, just because you are like my supervisor, someone that I look up to, it's okay to also be like, I'm learning too, and I made a mistake. And that's exactly like how you handle things.
Right. I think that's really good in the internship environment. It's also really good like with your patients. Like I've had cases, and my guess is most people that have been in clinic for even a little bit of time like realize we're not perfect. Like we may think something is going to progress a certain way, we may want to treat it a certain way, and it might be like totally textbook, and then you realize like people don't fit into a textbook, and
Sure.
We'll make clinical mistakes, and I think it's also important to like own up to that as well, because when a patient can see like, oh, they're actively learning through this, oh, they are paying attention, like if something doesn't go right, that then they're also going to change in order to hopefully make sure that it doesn't happen again. That really helps them build that trust with you too, because like it shows that you're present, like you're very in tune to what's going on, right or wrong. I can't remember. I heard somebody bring up some stat, and I like shouldn't bring up stats without remembering where they're from, but it was something like, if you make a mistake in business and you like correct it, it was like, and the person that you made the mistake with sees you correct it, then you're like 70 to 80% likely to like get their business again, because you're able to show them like, oh, they handled the problem, they were tentative to it, and it just teaches people like, be proactive with that stuff. If something doesn't go right, don't avoid it, don't like hide away from it, like address it. Say, hey, here's where we think it went wrong, here's how we're going to change stuff, and then let's try again. And that's basically like what our conversation was that week, was like,
Yeah, for sure.
things got crazy, and there were all sorts of other factors going on, and at the end of the week, like, I also didn't feel good either, but I didn't know what else to do at that time. And so like it felt good on my end to say like, hey, I might have just made a mistake, and like we might have just like managed this wrong, and I'm sorry. And I think the cool part of that was like we both showed up Friday ready to go, and like that was a monumental Friday for us.
Yeah, it was.
And so like to me, like that was a good reminder of like, yeah, you can have a bad day, the next day could literally be like your best day that you've had in a long time. So like, don't give up, don't get stuck, like keep trying to create a new opportunity every day, and then just like roll with it, and eventually like if you find yourself in a hole, you'll dig your way out of it. And if you're not in a hole, you're going to find that you're going to continue to like build yourself up, build your practice, like build things forward, but like you got to keep going. Yeah, that was a fun week.
Yeah.
That was wild.
No, I totally agree. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What do you find like the challenges are as a clinic owner having a student intern?
Yeah. That's funny. I just highlighted like the challenges part on our sheet. It's the challenging part, or one of the challenging parts is when you have a new student intern that's also able to be hands-on with patients, because certain students in schools will let interns like observe, but they can't treat. States have different laws too. So for some people, like you can only come in and observe. Or if I'm working with students from MSU here with undergrad students, like they have zero chiropractic training, so like they don't get to do any of the chiropractic-y stuff. So like managing them is very different than managing someone that like gets to actively be part of it. So it becomes like another bigger wheel in the process of things that like has to be managed and worked into like the whole thing. So I think one of the biggest challenges is making sure that the environment is a good space for them. So kind of like we talked about, making sure everybody's open to learning, open to trying, also open to like working with students. And some of that comes down to like training your patients. So for us, I think it works pretty well here because whether it's an MSU student that's shadowing or interning with us, we've had high schoolers, we've had middle schoolers, we've had chiropractic students. So for our patients, it's nothing out of the norm for us to have a +1 in the room. Versus like if you're in a clinic by yourself and you are the only person that a patient sees every time, it might throw them off a little bit. But for us, like we try and push that education part so that way like we get through that hurdle no problem.
And how do your patients find having students join appointments or be a part of it in whatever capacity?
Yeah, I think most of them enjoy it. It just brings another personality in there. I always joke around that I only have so many jokes to say in a clinic appointment anyways, so having someone else just to talk is a plus. But people are also just interested in people. And when you just show them like, hey, we're just here to help and care and just want to be connected, I think they enjoy that part. I also think a lot of patients appreciate working with a clinician that is also actively like learning and educating themselves, and like having students is a part of that. You know, I probably, I don't know if I ask as many questions as you because you're the queen of questions. Right?
Oh gosh.
But like I also ask a lot of questions myself, and so I think it's just a really positive thing for pretty much everybody when the environment is built on educating, and then it makes it fun because then like you just get to brainstorm and collab. So I think that was one of the bigger things, and then the other part, which we had a good moment with this, I don't know, probably a month ago or so, is just understanding that you only have so much time in between patient appointments. You still have to work with your staff, and luckily, like, my staff is fantastic. But, like, we only get so much wiggle room throughout the day, and we can only fit so many questions in that wiggle room throughout the day. So I think what was good for us was, you know, we kind of had a process, but really communicated like, hey, can we spend 10 minutes at the end of the day talking about this? Or like, is now a good time to talk about this? Because it's not always the best time to talk about it. So I think some advice that I would have for students and clinicians is like, have kind of a plan of how you talk through the things that you can't talk through in that moment. So like for us, we had like the document on the computer that was really helpful. We also have some other Google Docs that we're just always kind of adding to, but like have a process for it, because if you see a patient at 9 a.m. and you see something cool or you have a really good thought, good luck remembering that thought at 2:45, you know, after you've treated 10, 15 other people. Like there's too much going on. So finding ways to like make it stick, I think was really good for us.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think, too, to touch on that, you know, patient experience and being a part of appointments, adjusting, learning about different cases and how to manage them is amazing and a huge part of this internship. But another part, kind of to touch more on the docs that Dr. Luke talked about, was we had a Google Doc and these big chiropractic questions that I feel like I have, or big concepts like pain is a huge concept that, you know, most people are coming to chiros, not, you know, for fun, but because they're in pain. And so it was really cool. We had this document going and just these different questions that we collaboratively had come up with. And so when there was downtime, like taking that initiative as an intern to do research and to, you know, grow my knowledge and skill set in that even way of being more knowledgeable, to discuss like different conditions with patients and kind of work through some of these big questions. And yeah, totally. We had a sticky note on the computer that, you know, I'd write down the patient name and the question I had. And I think that as a student, it is important to be mindful that, yes, your clinic owner or the clinician that you're working with does have other things to do than like just be like 100% invested to you. And so finding like good opportunities and being mindful and respectful that they have other tasks that they have to do.
Yeah, and knowing like everybody has limits, right? And part of that is going to be dependent on like what is their experience. So like for my internship when I was with Dr. Mike, he'd already had, I don't know, I was probably intern number 6 or 7 with him or something like that. So like he'd already gone through the process a number of times. And like at the second clinic that I worked at, where I worked with my uncle, who's been a chiropractor for 30 plus years now, his clinic is 20 minutes away from Northwestern, which is the chiropractic clinic up in the Twin Cities area. And I think by the time that I got to his clinic, he'd had like 20 plus precepting interns. And he'd also worked with, I don't know, 5 or 6 different associates that he had hired. So for him, like when I showed up as an associate, like I was just another associate because he'd already gone through the process and gone through that learning curve. So those are other like good questions to ask, because if you're working with someone and you're like their first student, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. It just means like you might have to be more active in that collaborative process of like building out what it looks like. Allie was my second chiropractic student, technically. When I was working in the Twin Cities, I had one other one. Shout out to Dr. Kate. Yeah, talk to you soon on the podcast. But she was a student from Northwestern that got to work with me during her T8. And I tried to be very open with her and said, hey, I've never had a student like work on hands with me. I'm going to learn through this. I feel comfortable because Dr. Kramer, my boss, and uncle had so many before where I could refer to him like, hey, how should I manage the student with this? Or how do I teach them with this? So it's just really good to know like what is their bigger kind of support system and approach looks like, because then you can prepare for it. And like Kate and I had a fantastic internship experience, and she ended up coming back later in school for another one. But I think a lot of that was because we started on the same page. We talked about it. We said this is going to be a quick learning thing on both of our sides, and we're gonna both work together to do this. And that goes back to one of the themes that you keep saying is like, as a student, you have to own your internship. Like nobody gets to learn for you. Nobody gets to ask questions for you. Like you really need to be in charge of that, because then you'll be able to steer it that way.
Yeah. I would also say to be open-minded. Like, I think it's so, I could chuckle now. I think it's so classic to come into your last term of school like, okay, yeah, I just need to brush up my adjusting skills and that's all I need. And then I'm ready to, get into practice. But I think be open-minded. Trust that the doc, has other things to teach you and that you have other things to learn. Whatever's important to you that you want to get out of your internship or that you value. So maybe you value a doc that's an amazing adjuster, but has you don't care that he has terrible communication skills or that he's not going to teach you things outside of adjusting. I mean, to me, that's not what I valued, because ultimately you are at that clinic with a doc for several months, and I want to be in a space that is supportive and collaborative, and I'm learning not only just adjusting technique, but also patient management and, someone that will take all my questions and answer all the things before I'm in practice myself and having to, make all these clinical decisions almost basically by myself. So, taking charge of your own experience and realizing and having trust that there's probably other things that you need to learn or will learn, aside from just I want to be a great adjuster, that we all kind of come into our last term thinking.
Yeah. And you have to be an opportunistic learner, I think is like what that comes down to.
Perfect.
Because, whether you're a super good adjuster coming out of school right away or not, some patients are still going to say, sorry, I prefer Dr. Luke to work on things. And if a patient and at the end of the day, like, they get to make those decisions. I hope it should be up to them, right? But it's like, if a patient is going to say that and you just shut down and think, well, I don't get to be hands-on, so like, this is just not a thing for me, like, you miss what other opportunities there are to learn. And, you know, granted, we had only a handful of people that preferred me to treat a certain area versus not, but it still gives you a place to start. And right, like, we had, I think, a couple patients that wanted me to work with them initially, and then we kind of worked you into the process, because, you know, I have the benefit of having a pre-existing relationship with them, and like, we're just building. We have to get your trust built back up to catch up, basically.
Yeah, I even think that in itself is a skill. Like, when, again, you come in with this confidence into 10th term, you know, ready to go. And if patients do have a preference for, you know, the clinician, the owner to treat versus you, and if they state that, right, even that in itself is learning how to manage those, like, emotions of, does it mean I'm not good enough? Does it mean that, you know, I can't do a good enough job or treat the same way or similar way? And it's like, likely probably not about you.
Yeah.
But it's learning how to, like, again, in practice, then that should be a teaching moment to you of, okay, building patient relationships is really important. And those are some of the things that I feel like I've learned this term, you know, aside from being in student clinic, where lots of the students you're seeing could potentially be even friends you're seeing. Here, you know, when you're in the general public, you're having to learn how to build trust with people that you don't have, you know, the school in common to, like, talk about. So you might not have things in common necessarily to talk about. So you're having to, like, dig a little deeper. You're dealing with people that have never been to chiro maybe, or who are unsure, or who have had previous bad experiences, or who don't understand. You're having to learn how to educate them using terms that they can understand rather than our big scientific terms that we learn in school and are used to talking back and forth with one another. There's so many lessons that are valuable that I would argue, are only going to get from being in private practice in that last term of school, that you're not going to get when you're in student clinic.
Yeah, and I think one of the comments that you made partway through that process is, like, the idea of, if you can't be hands-on during a certain appointment, like, you can count that as a mental rep.
For sure.
Right? And Allie made this, I think, really cool comment where she's like, well, I didn't get to, you know, be actively a part of this patient appointment or experience, but she's like, but I could follow your thinking, and I was thinking along the similar lines that you were thinking, and was also communicating in a similar way that you were communicating. And I think that's such a cool tool that you can use when you're thinking, like, okay, am I thinking through the right process? Am I getting to, you know, a good place assessment-wise, like, even in my head? And then when I get to the education part, can I say it or explain it in a similar way that's, like, still going to connect? And, like, if you can look at it that way, like, your mental reps can be, like, unlimited.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's, again, you need to be open to that idea of, like, what you can learn that's not necessarily hands-on. So, yeah, for sure. I remember us having that conversation, and let's say, you know, it was a new patient appointment, and, you know, you were taking the history, you were going through the diagnosis, you were going through everything. I kind of sat back and was trying to be, like, one step ahead of you and be like, am I thinking the same thing that he's thinking? Are we along the same lines? It's almost like kind of a fun game you can play with yourself. And that's another way that, like, builds confidence and competence as a student without necessarily being hands-on. And that's something that I don't know I necessarily would have thought of before coming into this term.
Totally. And I think from the clinician standpoint, you kind of have to be in tune to, like, you know, is the student, are they engaged? Not necessarily engaged, but it's like, okay, it's been a while since they've been able to, like, actively be a part of an appointment. Can I create an opportunity for them to do so? Or can I just create an opportunity for us to have, like, a quick conversation? You know, and there were certain times throughout the day where we would call like a quick timeout, right? And you and I would step out and just say, okay, what are you thinking? Here's my thoughts. Okay, I want to do this. Why do you think I want to do this? And you can build in those little opportunities. Like today was a great example. Like we had another new patient come in today, and Allie took the history. I did the assessment. When we were done with that, we called a 90-second timeout. We went into the office and just said, hey, this is how I think we should approach it. And I like asked her, why do you think we should approach it that way? We talk through it quick, and then we go right back in. And then we get to just kind of lay it out for the patient. And I think a lot of our really good moments happened in those 1 to 2 minute timeouts that acted as a check-in for us to make sure that we're on the same page, making sure that we're thinking through the process together. And it doesn't even have to be that it's the same, right? Like, but it has to at least be in a similar direction.
Well, I think that would also then be my advice to clinicians or docs that want to take on a student to precept is, you know, whether you've been in practice for 10 years, 20 years, however long, I think, you know, you can forget what it's like to be a student. And so I think taking those opportunities and being intentional to be like, let's talk. What do you think? I'm going to put you on the spot. How would you manage this patient? What would you do? And inviting students in for that learning opportunity. And, you know, I've been told before in the past from a doc, like, don't intern with me. Like, I've been doing this for too long. Like, go somewhere else, you know, that can teach you. And so I guess, you know, remembering what it's like to be a student. And if you do have, hopefully all clinicians have good interns too. But if you do have a good intern, know that like they want to learn. They want to know what you're thinking. So the more information you give them, the more that you're helping them become better future clinicians. So the investment's definitely worthwhile in the end.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? So, you know, I don't think there's ever a point that's like too early to like connect with someone.
For sure.
Right?
I agree.
And one, because like you don't know what's going to happen, right? You don't know when people are going to come back, and you know, you might have met them during trimester 1 and then they reach out in 9th try like wanting to intern. Like, you don't know. But there's so many different things that you can learn along that process on both ends that like creates just so much value in that mentorship relationship. And I think for me on the clinical side, like that's one of the funner parts is being able to ask different students like, hey, what are you learning about right now? Like, what's in 4th try, or what's in 7th try, or tell me about your preceptorship, or tell me about your first year in practice. Like, there's so many different stages that we all go through, and again, like they're not all the same either. So it's just fun to talk through that process with each other, because like the learning doesn't stop once you get through school. Like you probably end up just learning more. It just looks it looks different, and it's probably in like less textbooks, but it's still through the same process. So like give it a chance. Like you never know who's going to end up being a good mentor for that. And like my perfect example of that is Dr. Mark Giebel, who's another chiropractor in Mankato, is one of my biggest mentors. And I think he graduated from Palmer, 8 years before me, something like that. And the way that we got connected was my dad was doing a plumbing project in the office space next door. And my dad went over to Dr. Mark's clinic and said, hey, I'm next door. I'm going to be making some noise, so you just let me know if I'm too loud. And also, my son goes to Palmer. And like a week later, Dr. Mark and I were on a phone having a conversation, and I've spent more time shadowing and mentoring in his clinic than I think I've been anywhere else. And like that was all because my dad said, hey, I met this Palmer grad the other day because I was working on the plumbing stuff next door. Like you can't plan for that.
No, you never know where Whether it's the business meetings that I've attended with you or even my time with you, you never know where life will take you and the opportunities. And so I think be open to everything. Don't discount anything and just take every opportunity to learn.
Yeah. Love it. I think that's a good spot for us to wrap up.
I agree.
Honestly. And appreciate you and your time here. This will be the last time that on this podcast that we'll refer to you as Intern Allie, which is wild. But I'm excited for us to kind of continue this conversation postgraduate and work through some of these other things, because they definitely planted a lot of good seeds and ideas for me, my business, my clinic, and just like our professional relationship that we had. So I really want to thank you for that. And
no, thank you.
Excited for you and where things are going next.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, that's the end of episode 1. Stay tuned for episode 2, where we're going to bring in some personal trainers and fitness people, I think.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, keep living life, y'all.